Hello, friend. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People podcast, the Shana Meyerson story. This week, you're going to hear about a lady who was an achiever her entire life, how one moment blew up and derailed her entire world, so to speak, and not just in one isolated area, but in many. You're going to see how this impacted her life, but how she also learned to believe in herself, how to fall, how to pick herself back up, and then how she learned to help others also do the same. You're also going to hear about a woman who was supported by her parents, but then while she's attending an Ivy League school that they're paying for, she had to turn around and tell them, hey, thanks for forking out all this money, but I'm going to be a yoga instructor. So you're going to see how that went down, how it ended, and you're going to learn during this episode about, again, believing in ourselves, about it's okay to fall, and so much more. So we're going to take a short commercial break from one of our affiliate sponsors, and then we're going to get back to our episode and time together with our remarkable friend, Shana Meyerson. Enjoy. Did you ever have one of those nights where you kept waking up for different reasons? Not necessarily that you were physically uncomfortable, but your mind's racing. You get up, you get a drink, you use the bathroom, you go back to bed. I had one of those nights last night, and it happened to me 3 times. All 3 times I got back in bed, I was like, ah. And the reason was, seriously, my pillow. I love my pillow, as you've heard me say on my podcast, on my website, on social media, in person. I truly love my pillow. They're more than pillows. They have over 250 plus quality products, mostly made in America, and they are best in class. Everyone I've used: pillow, sheets, blankets, slippers, mattress toppers, bath towels, kitchen towels, and more. So last night, when I'm exhausted but having a hard time sleeping, I take my pillow. I have the Giza sheets on it, and they just feel cool and comfy as I lay on my 3-inch My Pillow mattress topper 2.0. I was snug and cozy, and it put me right back asleep. So even though I woke up 3 times, it wasn't because the pillows, the sheets, and the mattress. It was because my mind was racing. And that's what the podcast is for, to help us point to God. God will show us how to wipe our minds clean and sleep like a baby. But on the physical realm, My Pillow will help you do it. So go to mypillow.com/remarkable, use promo code remarkable, enjoy 30 to 80% off everything you order every time. Save a ton of money from for your family, sleep better than you probably ever have, and support a great American company run by great Americans. So I'm David Pasqualone. Let me know how you love your new My Pillow products when they come in, and enjoy this episode now with our remarkable friend, Shana Meyerson. Hey, Shana, how are you today?
I'm doing great, having an awesome morning and ready for the rest of a great day. How about you?
Man, I'm doing remarkable. It's been fantastic today. Busy, but great. And I just told our listeners a small bit about your episode and what to expect, but right out of your mouth, if our listeners stick with you through this entire episode, they're going to get tips and information they can glean from and better their life. But if there's one truth or one technique or one principle that you promise you're going to share with them today that they can apply and run with in their life to have even a better existence, what would that be?
If you want to be remarkable, you have to believe in yourself. Doesn't matter how many people in the world believe in you. As long as you believe in yourself, you can do anything.
Beautiful. And we always go through the show chronologically through life from birth through today, because everything that happens to us, good, bad, ugly, pretty, pretty ugly, it all makes us the men and women we are today, right? So you grew up in a super nurturing household and everybody was encouraging and passed us down for generations, right?
Um, you might be being sarcastic,
I
but
am
yeah,
being very
I,
sarcastic.
I actually am blessed that all of that does apply to
Good.
to my life. I had and have an incredibly nurturing family, parents, grandparents, and family structure. So I am blessed beyond belief in that respect.
Well, start from the beginning. Tell us, what was your childhood like, your upbringing, brothers, sisters, mom, dad? Where did you grow up geographically? Because we have listeners from all around the world, different cultures, different countries. So start with your life.
Yeah. So I was born in upstate New York, though I moved to California when I was 8. So I don't associate very much with New York, but my family is definitely a very New York-y family. Most people see the New York right through my parents in particular. I have 3 siblings, and I grew up in I would say traditional, but not religious Jewish home. We were very, very close with my grandparents and cousins growing up. And honestly, family has always been extremely important to us. Um, Growing up, I would say that I was a very, very typical middle child. There were 4 of us. My older sister got the privilege of being the oldest. My little sister got the privileges of being the youngest. My brother in the middle with me got the privileges of being the only boy. And then there was me. And I think I played that role very, very close to the expectation, which is to say classic overachiever.
All right. And then you're growing up. You said, and I was being sarcastic at the beginning because most people don't come from a loving, nurturing home. So even though you moved to California, did you have a family structure in place there? Was it just your immediate family? What was that like?
Yeah, no, I'm 53 now, so just to put this in perspective. So in 1979, my family came out to just visit. My father had a cousin in Southern California. We came to visit them, and in 1980, we moved out. My parents were like, yeah, no, this is where we need to be. So, with the exception of this one cousin, we were pretty much on our own as this piece of the nuclear family.
Okay. And then you're growing up, you're the overachiever. What's that mean to you? And how does that play out in everyday life?
Now or then?
Then back then.
Right. So I guess that growing up, I was the easiest way I could term it would be just like a praise junkie. I could do no wrong, and therefore I was always, winning all the awards and getting all the praise, and I expected all that. I didn't think there was anything special about, I guess, the special things that I was accomplishing. In fact, I felt as if that were my imperative rather than an option. And it's very interesting because I felt like I always had to be, straight A, AP student, captain of the teams, president of the clubs, and just go down the list, that I became very, very judgmental of myself, very unaccepting of any foibles of getting, a question wrong on a test, or, losing a game of something. And it made for a very dangerous precedent once I got into the real world, because once you get past about high school, failure is inevitable. Okay. In a lot of different terms, in a lot of different ways. And I use the term failure very loosely because I don't believe anymore that there really is failure so much as falling, and we get to choose whether to fall up or fall down. And that's something I really had to learn in my 20s, and I would say ultimately when I discovered yoga just weeks before my 30th birthday was when I really started to understand the concept of being okay with myself as I was, even in my perfect imperfection.
So between the overachiever in school and now 30 and what you're talking about, kind of finding this piece of yourself, Is there anything we skipped in your life story that's significant that's going to play in down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the most significant thing that happened relative to that piece of my story is that I did not, even at 53, it's hard for me to say sometimes. I did not get into Stanford, which was my life goal. Now that might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people because, it's one school and who cares. But going back to the praise junkie thing and this feeling that, failing or falling is failing, I was not just devastated emotionally, but I think that my whole sense of self, like my whole confidence structure, like completely crumbled that day that I got that thin envelope. And for the next so I was 17. So for the next 13 years or so, I really felt inadequate, unimportant, like a complete failure. I carried that with me to such an extraordinary extent. In fact, I mean, it's a little funny in retrospect, but not really. When I got that letter and I was playing the USTA junior circuit, the tennis circuit, and I had a tournament that weekend and in which I was the number one seed, and which means, among other things, that your first game or your first match is going to be against probably the last seed, right? And I lost the first game. Okay, not even a set, not a match, the first game, which, as you know, could be as few as 4 points, right? And I walked off the court and never went back to tennis. That's how much I believe my life had literally ended that day that Stanford rejected me. I mean, it's funny now, but it was not, believe me, it was not the least bit funny back then. I
No,
really,
not at all. And the thing is, there's people listening, men and women around the world, who've had similar experiences. So it's not that we go through the experiences, that how do we overcome and achieve and work
that's
through
right.
it? So looking back now, talking to yourself then, now talking to our audience, what would you recommend in hindsight? The perfect 2020 vision. If you were talking to your young self or someone today listening who's going through the same struggle, they just got rejected, and in reality, it's not a big deal, but they feel like they lost everything. What would your advice to them be?
Well, to me, there's this interesting concept that, let's say I am everything that I am, right? On whatever, I don't know what date. Let's say April 14th, whatever, 1989. And on that day, from the moment I received the letter to from the moment before that moment, nothing changed, right? Had I gotten a thick letter, it wouldn't have made me a different person than the same exact person that was rejected. And quite frankly, when you get to the level of, say, Stamford University, at some point the admissions process is to an extent arbitrary, meaning there's only so many kids with a poor 4.5 who are the president of this and the captain of that and the winner of this. Every single person who applies to Stanford has your same resume, and there's only so many kids who are going to get in. So to say that I would have been something had I gotten in, but because in that moment I didn't get in and therefore I was relegated to nothing, was an absolutely ridiculous binary. It just wasn't true in any way. And I think that that's something that I really carried with me in the last, say, 20 years of adulthood or so, where I can't let the decisions of the world around me affect my perception of who I am, because it could have just as easily gone the other way and it would not have made me a different person. It just would have made me a person with a different decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. they're the way other people look at us doesn't define who we are. Because there's people who think really high of you, there's people who think really low of you, there's people who think kind of on target. But the only opinions that matter is God and our own. Everything else is just icing on the cake. So to help work yourself out, what did you do to overcome this? What did you do? What were the things that happened in your life? And maybe it's a process. So we'll continue from that point through today. Or is there like a 1, 2, 3 steps that you looking back figured out to help you overcome and just be like, it's not that important?
Yeah, honestly, I carried that with me until my first yoga class. And to say that it all sort of shifted gears in a moment is hardly an exaggeration, because when I went to that class, and it was strangely humbling in how difficult it was, much more so than I was expecting it to be. It was the first time in my entire life, and I this is no incrimination of my parents. My parents, again, were amazing parents. They did everything exactly the way they thought they should. They praised me for everything, and it wasn't because they wanted to coddle me, right? It was just that's the kind of parents they were, and what it built in this like sort of perfectionist paradigm for me was not their fault. It was my own fault. But when I got to yoga, it was the first time, I think, in my life that anybody told me that it was okay to fall. And that was such a profound revelation, because I'm like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean it's okay to fall? Why didn't anybody tell me this when I was 3? You know? And the reason was they didn't really have to, because I wasn't falling, right? But I did at 30 and way too late finally find that reinforcement that I really was lacking for the 13 years in between that rejection letter and my first yoga class.
And what was that like? So every human's different, every experience is different. I remember people telling me how hard cycling classes were. And when I was in shape, I go and it was a breeze. I went to yoga and I was like, I'm dying. I couldn't stand up. I was shaking. I was humiliated. It was awful. But I was like, I got to keep practicing this because I suck
Right.
really bad. So what was your yoga experience like?
Well, I can't say it was that traumatic. I was I think that, I hate to say this, I was sort of a natural, like I took to it very well. I wasn't falling all over the place. It was hard, it was sweaty, it was physically challenging, but I could do all the poses. And, I would say overall it was egotistically gratifying, which is interesting because it only took me about, I don't know, maybe a year to understand that the point of yoga is not egotistical gratification. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It's letting go of your ego. And so it was only when I started switching to the classes that were doing all the crazy arm balances and inversions and contortions that I couldn't just do right out of the gate, that I was really able to step into my power, which was encapsulated in a combination of being able to do things and not being able to do things, and knowing that it was okay to fall as long as I got back up. It's never okay to fall if you just lie there and say, I'm done. But if you fall, as Bruce Lee says, I think it was Bruce Lee, 7 times and get back 8, you're on the right course.
Yeah, that's actually all over the Bible. A just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. And then it talks about how
Oh, and here I
fool.
am giving the credit to Bruce Lee.
If it's real, it's from the Bible. Old Testament, New Testament, whatever, people like you said, you were from a Jewish background. It's in the Old Testament more than
Yeah.
it's in the New Testament. I remember in college when I taught, this kid quoted Spider-Man, to whom much is given, you know, your response, or whatever it is, that cheesy Stan Lee line. That's from the
Okay.
Bible. To whom much is
Okay.
given, much is required. If anything great,
Yeah.
short term, and long's out there, it's God. But
It is pretty amazing how prophetic the Bible, and again, I'm talking about, well, what I would call the Torah, what you would call the Old Testament, and the wisdom of the New Testament. It's so prophetic that it's almost, I hate to say it, it's almost like aliens came from the future and said, hey guys, here's the roadmap. Everything you need is here. Read it carefully.
Yeah.
You
Or
know, because it's like every time we hit a new life crisis, you could find a passage that addresses it to such an like eerie extent that it's like they wrote it today.
yeah, I mean, everybody from I think we talked about this on our pre-show. We have listeners from all around the world, different belief systems, and people come here because they know we have honest and real conversations, and they know what we teach works, right? So what you're teaching them today, they can apply their lives and grow and better themselves. But I come at everything from a Christian worldview, and there is nothing. There's not one thing I can find in the Bible that isn't true. And like you said, everything going on today, it's not like you're trying to make it fit. It's the living word of God, and it's alive and it changes. And you could read the same chapter and verse 18 times in a row for 18 days, and then one day it just speaks to you differently, and it's right what you need, right? So
That,
I agree with you completely, except the
that's
alien part. I think God wrote it, not aliens.
I'm joking about the aliens. I'm
No,
just
I know.
talking about that it's like a message from the future, even though it's a message from the past. It's so profoundly prophetic. But I actually feel exactly the same way you do. That it literally morphs in such a surreal way that sometimes I question: did it actually change, like some weird cartoon where all of a sudden the letters change on the page and you're looking at something totally different? Because it doesn't matter how many times you read it. It doesn't matter how many times you go over like the same exact passage. Each like I actually have the same experience, not to belittle the Bible, but with the Yoga Sutras, which is sort of like, it's not a Bible because it's not religious, but we call it like sort of like colloquially the Bible of yoga. But I could read the same insight 5 times a year and get 5 different, and I'm like, wait, I don't understand. I know I've read this page, but it looks as if I haven't never read this page. And so when it comes to the Bible, sometimes I feel like God almost rearranges what's in front of us to speak to what we need.
Yeah. I mean, I'm never gonna say like you can't put God in a box, right? Like it's when you think God only works one
Sure.
way, you're totally wrong. It works, who knows how he works except him. But like sometimes we change and grow. Sometimes we're being blocked. Our paradigm is being blocked because of problems, and then they're removed and we can open up. Sometimes it's just, I believe that every answer to every question is truly in the Bible. It's just, is it the time for us, is it to be revealed to us, you know? Because it's like a little kid. If you tell a little kid everything about life, you're going to explode their head. But you tell them a little bit each more as they get older, as they grow. And that's how I
Mhm.
always view the Bible. God gives us what we need as we need it, right? So you're doing yoga and you're like, whoa, I'm naturally good at this. You get a little ego going, but then as you learn about the yoga, you learn about letting go of the ego. And it's the
Right.
exact opposite. So talk about that. How did you learn to let go of your ego?
Yeah. And it's a bit of a conundrum that I have to be honest, I think most people, especially in the social media age, don't really come to, because they get so wrapped up in like how they look on Instagram, or even just in front of a class, that they subvert that to the actual practice, which is just seeing if you could keep your mind calm in the midst of potential chaos. So even as perhaps I, let's say, succeed at some very hard or difficult yoga postures, I personally put very little credence to the asana practice, meaning that it's just a practice. It's the small physical piece of a broader spiritual and mental practice. And so it would be like cooking a tremendous meal for friends, right? And just focusing so much on your trip to the grocery store. Right? Yeah, that's what got the meal on the table, because had you not gone to the store, you wouldn't have the food. But it's not really what it's all about. And so the process of letting go of the ego, it took me, I'll be honest, it did take me a little while. I can't remember how long because it was so long ago. But at first, I was sort of proud that I could do some things that the other people in the room, were really, really struggling with. But you have to dissociate yourself from anything else that's going on in the room, from anybody else's process, because their process is not your process. And when you can narrow down your practice to your own mat instead of worrying about what's going on the mats around you, I mean that figuratively and literally, then your ego will start to dissipate.
And how do you start identifying? Because some people are like, I'm humble. I don't have an ego. And they get the fattest ego of them all, right? How do you
Sure.
self acknowledge? And because, the first step of anything is recognition to get better,
Sure.
right? So did you have friends tell you? Did you listen to the instructor? Did God just lay it on
Yeah.
your heart?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to say that I always say if you think you've arrived, that's the first sign you haven't. So it's just, I mean, honestly, I think it's just basic humility. I think that maybe one of the beauties of the practice is that no matter how good you get, there are things that you're going to do better than others, and there are things that others are going to do better than you. And so if you can acknowledge that, that person over there who is struggling with this pose that you do so easily also happens to have a certain flexibility that you lack, then there's no room for judgment of what's better or harder or easier or any of the things, right? And so honestly, the yoga practice itself, one of the philosophies is this concept of Maya. Maya means illusion, which means that nothing in the world of duality, which is the world that we live in, of sensory perception, is real, right? Sensory perception by default creates our own reality, right? Two people, you see this all the time in crime scenes, right? Like 5 people witness the same crime and they all see something completely different, right? The
Yeah.
way that they describe the criminal is different. The setting is different. What happened is different. Who is the victim is different. How did it occur? And so when we understand that our vision of reality is purely subjective and there's nothing objective about being good at something or being bad at something, it's a lot easier to let it go. And so the teachings of the yoga really did help me immensely in releasing my ego. Now, do I have any ego left? Of course I do. We all do. You can't survive in the world and have no sense of ego. But I can say that it is my constant work to try to let go of these attachments as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's a constant, like you said, it's a constant growth. Iron sharpeneth iron. So the man accountants of his friend. We're working on ourselves. Like we talked about, just man falls 7 times and rises up again. You don't quit. So as you're going to these yoga classes, where does your life go from there? How do you decide this is something I want to stick with? And where does it take you through today?
Sure. I would have to say that I did not find yoga. Yoga found me. And I think that when we reach the most like pivotal points in our lives, that as long as we're receptive to them, life will unfold naturally from there. I knew pretty much immediately from first experiencing yoga that it was something that I just didn't want to practice, but that I wanted to share with the world. More specifically, my original vision really was to bring yoga to children. Now, these days, every child, at least in LA, but many children across the world practice yoga. It's a very, very normal thing. In 2002, it was not a normal thing. I mean, it was, in fact, outside of India, it was considered to be completely ridiculous. So I started my mini yogis program actually in March of 2002, because to me, it seemed like an imperative. It seemed like I had been given information that the next generation really needed to hear in order to thrive in the world that was unfolding in front of them. So I guess, I mean, I don't guess. It was a calling. It was a calling, and I answered it. And I think that we spend a lot of time in life trying to shove, round pegs into square holes, or square pegs into round holes. But when something is meant to be, you just know.
So then, where does your life go from there?
Well, as I mentioned, I was already almost 30 years old at that point when I went to my first class. I had a great career. I was also in the process of getting my MBA here at UCLA. I mean, I was like in the thick of life. And had you told me the day before yoga that I would ever become a yoga instructor, I would have laughed in your face. It was only a matter of months before I left my job, and I also left UCLA for a number of reasons in order to pursue a career as a yoga instructor. And it was somewhere between a really tremendous leap of faith and no leap at all, because I just had the faith.
And what were your parents? Were your parents still alive at this point? What were they
Yeah,
thinking?
yeah, they're still alive at this point, in fact. It's funny, I was a little reluctant to tell them. So they had paid for a very expensive Ivy League education. Now I was getting my MBA, and they had sort of higher expectations of me for sure. And so telling them that I am leaving business school in order to become a yoga instructor, I did not exactly expect a positive reception, but believe it or not, my parents were extraordinarily supportive, because it's in their nature. First of all, my mom in particular will support anything I do ever. She thinks her 4 kids are just the greatest 4 people who ever walked the face of the planet, and end of story. So whatever you want, I support. My father, it was interesting because my father is somebody who I would say overall, it never really found his ultimate calling in life. He did what the world expected him to do instead of what maybe would have made him happy, right? He grew up in the age where you get to be a doctor or lawyer. Those are your choices, right? And that was very typical of, Jewish families in that generation, which is why if you look at everybody in my parents' generation, they're all lawyers and doctors. Like, it was almost a joke at that period. And so I know that my father never found his truest happiness, because when you commit to work that you don't love, is a nice way of putting it. I mean, he didn't even like it. That you destine yourself to a certain fate, that you're talking about 5/7 of your life, right? And so my father's response to me was, I'm glad that you found the thing that makes you happy, and I think that you should do it. And my father has his engineering degree, his MBA, and his JD. My mother also has multiple degrees all the way through. She's not a JD, but a psychologist. And education's a big thing in my family. So the fact that they didn't even say, how about just finish your MBA first? Or something to that. But they're like, you know what? You got to follow your dream, because that's where you're going to find your success. And I did.
And what did that look like? So you leave college, you leave corporate America, you go to pursue this dream of yoga. You
Yes.
felt it was your calling, and bring us through to today.
Right. So it was sort of interesting because when I left my job, right, I didn't have a real safety net other than I'm a good saver. I had money saved. And about a week after I left that job, out of nowhere and very unexpectedly, a very large company contacted me and said, "Are you available to write this fitness app for us?" Again, a very famous fitness app, but I'm not allowed to talk to it about it because of NDA reasons. And it was interesting because so I had been a writer in previous iterations of my life. It didn't come out of nowhere, but it came out of nowhere because it's not a job I had applied for. And what was interesting about it is that freelance writing is something you can do any time of any day, right? You can do it
Mhm.
in the middle of the night, you can do it in the middle of the morning, you can do it in the middle of the day, the afternoon, which meant that I could spend as much time as I wanted building this new yoga career while still earning money, right? As a writer. And
Mhm.
so what I did was I taught for free for 3 months, just anyone who wanted yoga, just so I could basically get my sea legs and find some clients, because if they like me, they'll continue with me. But what's most interesting is by the time I finished this freelance writing gig, I was earning as much at yoga as I had been at my previous job. Is literally like God was like, "Here, I'm just going to take you right to where you need to be, and you could take it from there." So it was very, very interesting. Like just the timing was pretty interesting, and the fact that I was teaching adults as well, right out of the gate. However, the fact that I was one of maybe a handful of people in the entire Western world who was teaching yoga to children made my program just explode in a positive way very, very, very quickly. So, yeah, my success was unexpected when I gave up my career and my master's program. I did so with the knowledge that I might not ever earn another dollar. And I think that it's because I was willing to take that risk that the risk paid off for me because I knew so deep down inside that it would.
Yeah, and so many people we know, all of us, they just love what they do, they're passionate about it, and the money comes. I think, did you ever see the Alan Watts video? And he talks about, what if money didn't matter? I'll put a link in your show notes for any listeners who want to watch it. It's exactly what Shauna's talking about. And it's just great clip, couple minutes long. And it's like, what would you do if money didn't matter? You would want to do yoga, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. So it's great. And then the money flows because you're an expert at what you do. So when you're building this practice, are you focused on the children's side, the adult side, or where does it go between where you intended it and where you are today?
Yeah, and I mean that's a big business discussion. There's a lot of lessons to be learned in this. So, in the beginning, most of my focus was on my mini yogis program because it got so big so fast and it literally took me around the world. I to date, I've taught at about 200 different studios across the globe for mini yogis and for YOGAthletica together. Now, what's interesting is one weekend, and it was probably about a dozen years ago, I was on my way to a studio that had been teaching at every single year. I still do my mini yogis teacher training. And at that point, was very good friends with the owners, right? Because I had been there, quite a few years in a row. And I said to them, "Well, would you be open to my doing some YOGAthletica workshops?" Because at that point, I wasn't doing the YOGAthletica workshops, even though I was teaching, right? YOGAthletica students. And they said to me, and they said this in all kindness, they said, Shana, everybody thinks of you as a kid's yoga teacher. Nobody's going to take you seriously as an adult instructor. And so I like that really shocked me to the core because, again, I don't want to say this in an egotistical manner, but I have one of the more advanced practices out there. You know, if you've seen it in a book, I can do it, right? And so that really woke me up. And what I decided that weekend after hearing that was, if I were a parent, okay, and my kid has a yoga instructor, right? No matter how good they are with my kid, I'm not going to look at them and go, oh, yeah, no, that's probably the instructor for me. I look at them as something less than, right? Not less than, but like less than a full adult instructor. They play with kids, right? But the flip side of that was, if I'm an adult and I have an instructor and it turns out they also work with children, then I'm going to be like, heck yeah. You know, she's such a great instructor. I could only imagine what she could do with a child, right? It didn't go both ways. So I made the decision, which in retrospect, at least financially, was not a great one, to pivot to focusing on my YOGAthletica. And because I already literally owned the children's yoga space, that I would just let that sort of take a life of its own, right? What I didn't anticipate was that the kids' yoga space became tremendous in the late or mid to late teens, like 2000, probably 18, 19. And then when the pandemic came, that's when yoga for kids just took over the whole entire world, because all these people, you know, were locked in their houses, and there were so many videos out there that were being put out, right? And so what happened was, in essence, I had cut off my nose to spite my face, because I really, and I still do focus primarily on my YOGAthletica, because it speaks to the hard work that I put in on my mat every day. Though I love, love, love working with children, at this point, most searches, I don't even think mini yogis even comes up. If you type in yoga for kids Los Angeles, wherein I used to literally be the only one that came up. And I've trained over 1,000 teachers in this city alone, who are all my competition now.
Yeah. So now that you have this new focus, I mean, there's, from a marketing side, it's like, well, we can SEO and fix that.
Yeah.
But where is your heart? Is it with the children, or is it with the adults? Where is your heart today?
It's with humanity. I love them both for different reasons. When I work with children, I know that I'm changing their future. And there's nobody on earth who loves kids more than I do. There might be some people who love them as much as I do, but I love children with every tiny ounce of my being. But I also know that, you know, adults these days need a lot more grounding, and they need to, I don't know, sometimes refocus their priorities, or even just a lot of them step back from the overwhelm. So I know that the yoga is a gift for them as well. I mean, my big expertise is handstands. I love teaching like that really, really, you know, challenging aspect of yoga to help people to overcome their self-limiting beliefs. So I can't really weigh one against the other. I really love them all.
Well, good. And then if someone's listening to you and they're like, I think I want to try yoga, what is something, because if you don't know, you don't know. Like, how do you know what's a qualified practitioner? How do you know someone who's not just wasting time? How do you know somebody who didn't pick up a book or make stuff up? You know what I mean? What should people be looking for in a qualified yoga program?
Boy, that's a hard question these days because it really depends on what you call qualified. A lot of the commercial yoga practice out there have no real connection to like sort of the more traditional practice. So I guess you have to figure out like what is your ultimate goal and work backwards, because if the ultimate goal is say to get a workout, which I think is sadly, but is why about 95% of people practice yoga in America today, then I think it doesn't matter that much, which teacher, just whoever resonates with you. The reason I say it's hard to qualify is there is like this, what's called a Yoga Alliance standard, but there's no oversight to Yoga Alliance. And so it doesn't really prove anything other than you paid to do a teacher training. So, what I would say is find the teacher, A, who you resonate with on a personal level, because you do want to connect with them. But B, I think that most people have I guess like a generic instinct for whether somebody knows what they're talking about or if they're just phoning it in. And ask questions, don't be afraid to ask questions. If a teacher says something that either you want more information on because you're interested in, or maybe it doesn't make sense, ask the question. And if they have a reasonable explanation, then hopefully it's because they are qualified to be your teacher.
And is there like a national, international board or some kind of website, or maybe your website that people can go to? Because I remember going to a couple of yoga classes and being like, what the hell are they talking
Yeah.
about? They're like using terms and phrases and even the ways to
Yeah.
move your body, like, pull your spine to your belly button. Like it's like all these things that make total sense to somebody who does it all the time. But for a first timer, I wish I was more prepped before I went in these classes. What would you recommend for the listeners who are going to try it to get set?
Well, first of all, Yoga Alliance is the regulating board, the regulating body for yoga, both in America and outside of America. Again, there's no oversight to Yoga Alliance, so I don't know how very, very credible it is. Second of all, the big shortcoming, quite honestly, of the yoga industry is that we really don't have any level one classes. I know in LA, it doesn't exist. Or I've never seen it. And everywhere I go in the world, people complain about the same, that you're just sort of like thrown into this level 1, 2 pool where a lot of the people in there, most of the people in there have, you know, maybe even years of experience. And it's a little bit like taking a kid, throwing them in the pool and saying, now swim. Right. So that is a challenge. What I do recommend, if anybody is serious about getting an honest to goodness indoctrination to the practice, I would say it's a good idea to start with 1 or 2 private lessons, maybe more than that, to at least get some one-on-one help and feedback from a teacher so that they can at least put you on the right track, so that when you do get into the class, you're not completely lost and you have built at least a foundation for understanding what's going on in front of you
All
and around.
right. So between your birth and today, is there anything we missed before we go on to where you are today and where you're headed next?
In 53 years, is there anything that we've missed? I'm sure that there are a lot of things that we've missed, but I can tell you that one pivotal point when I left business school was very interesting, because I was in an entrepreneurship class, and the professor out of nowhere said to the class, Ms. Meyerson is not an entrepreneur. Simply teaching yoga to children does not make one an entrepreneur. Now, I was one of 2 people in the whole entire class that had a business, and I was really appalled that he would say that. And I stood up and I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I created a business, I found the market, and I'm making a living at it. I'm like, what is your definition of an entrepreneur? And I left and I never went back. That was actually the day I quit my MBA. But what was funny was 1 year later, almost exactly, I was the lead story at Entrepreneur Magazine.
That's awesome. That's in the sense of, you know, it makes you feel good when stuff like that happens. It's like you're not wishing harm on anybody, but the truth is, I don't care if it's Ivy League school or a state college. If anybody's being honest, most of the information and teaching coming out of university isn't real practical in life. It doesn't work in real life. It's theoretical and it's flawed. So you went and you actually did it, and that teacher was probably jealous of you because they couldn't do it and they knew it. That's, I mean, from my experience, I worked at a college, you attended college, it's just, there's that saying I hate, but there's a lot of truth to it. Those who can do, do, and those who can't do, teach. And there's some great teachers out there that can do and they can teach.
Right.
But there's a lot of losers out there with tenure that should be fired. And they're not helping society. Let's just say that. You're paying them to be a waste of time. So it sounds like you had one of those winners.
Well,
So, huh?
I mean, the conclusion of the story was actually not all that. So I struggled again with my ego whether to send him this article or not. And I opted for yes, send it to him. And he actually was very humble. He invited me in to speak to his class about entrepreneurship. He took me out to dinner, and he basically, for what it turned out is that, he's an older gentleman. Back then, he was probably already in his 80s. And he was German. He was very just sort of like this. And he was explaining to me basically his concept of an entrepreneur literally is like Ray Kroc, Bill Gates, like he didn't see Jeff Bezos. He didn't see that there was like a microcosmic version of these people. And so he's like, had you created like a whole chain of studios and it was across the country, I would have called that entrepreneurship. It wasn't the kids' yoga specifically that was the problem. And so I just realized that I just had a more personal vision where an entrepreneur is somebody who creates their own a business from their own reality. And he didn't. He actually, I came to understand, had no, no malevolence towards me. He just saw the world in a different way than I did.
Yeah, and I get it, but the fact is his paradigm was flawed, and people are paying $100,000 a semester to listen to his flawed logic. And it's not him specifically, but so many people.
Yeah.
They're so liberal, their minds fell out. They open their minds so wide, their brain fell out. So I'm glad you called him on it and sent him that article, and I'm glad that one ended well. But how many lives did he destroy and how many people did he discourage before you stepped in his face? I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I don't want to be all touchy-feely. I'm trying to be real. And if you don't agree, say you're wrong. I don't mind.
Yeah, no, I honestly don't know that. My only experience with him was that one class.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so now you're on the cover of Entrepreneur Magazine. And between then and today, where does your life take us? And I want to touch back to where we started too. You said if they listen to this episode, you're talking about believing in yourself. And while your life is an example of this, there had to be moments of self-reflection. And there had to be moments of, like you said, well, I just knew. I just knew yoga. What were some of the things you thought? Was some of the things you felt? How can someone else confirm this knowledge that you felt?
I think that we have to maintain a confidence that we can do anything, but that we don't create our own timeline, right? God does, or the universe does, however you want to define it. And so, like, if you can think of anything in this world that you go into with complete confidence, and we all have things that we go into with complete confidence, we don't even think about them anymore. They just unfold. And so what we need to do is figure out what it is we bring to those things and how can you replicate that same mindset for other aspects of your life. So for example, a lot of people are scared of doing handstands in the middle of the room. I have complete confidence doing a handstand in the middle of the room. That being said, I do a lot of variations of a handstand in the middle of the room, and they might seem super scary to some people, but to me, I'm like, okay, well, I know that even if I fall, I know how to fall safely. Right. And so I just do it and do it and do it until I get it. And that's the whole thing, is that if you could understand that progress is nonlinear and it is okay to fall as long as you know how to quote unquote fall safely, that you can continue to progress. Even if there are steps back, we always continue to step forward.
Beautiful. So where are you today? Where are you headed next? And how can we as a community help you get there?
Well, I mean, today I am teaching yoga full time, still in Los Angeles, and also on Zoom. And I also have my signature handstand course that I teach, and that is remote. It's called my Handstand Breakthrough Revolution, and it's actually a combination of handstands and self-empowerment. So my website has all the links to all my social and all my programs that I offer. But mainly, if anybody is serious about not just trying yoga, but really making it an important part of their lives, I would love to be a part of that. And one thing I can tell you about a more advanced versus a less advanced instructor is that with a more advanced instructor, you don't have to be in the same room with them. Meaning I could teach somebody to do a handstand almost as effectively over the internet as I can in the room with me. That in general, I do not have to touch people to teach them yoga because I know how to articulate the information that I need to get across. So yeah, if people are in LA, of course I do lessons here in LA in person.
Beautiful. And what is your website again?
It's YOGAthletica. It's YOGAthletica.com. And all of my links are there. And also, I also have 2 channels on Vimeo that have hundreds of full-length classes if people prefer a much less expensive and accessible way to practice every day on demand.
Beautiful. And we'll put links to that in the show notes, as always, ladies and gentlemen. But Shauna, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for sharing your story. Any
Thank you.
closing words to our community before we wrap this episode up?
I just want to say, keep the faith. Faith is what carries us, and you could define your own faith. But, it's funny. My favorite biblical passage, actually, even though I'm Jewish, is actually from the Christian Bible, from the New Testament, which is that if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you. You'll be able to move mountains. And so what's interesting about that is faith is indivisible. So if you can stop questioning yourself and stop questioning the universe and just accept that everything is happening for the best, hopefully life takes you to the most incredible places.
I think that's well said and a great way to end the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, like our slogan says, don't just listen to great content, but do it, repeat it so you can have a great life in this world, but more importantly, in eternity to come. So, Shauna, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, check out Shauna's website. You can click in the show notes, go right there, continue the conversation with her at your convenience. And if you have any questions, reach out to her or myself and share this episode with your friends and family, people you know it's going to help. That way, we just continue to help people in the world and grow together. So I'm David Pasqualone. This was our remarkable friend, Shauna, and we will see you in the next episode. Ciao.
Thanks, David.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat for life. The Remarkable People Podcast.